Support for Seattle Now comes from the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association with the Columbia Snake River System, providing clean energy and sustainable commerce as Washington aims for carbon neutrality by 2030. Learn more at pnwa.net/rivervalues.
Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Monday, and this is Seattle Now. President Trump is still hospitalized with COVID-19 at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, but his run for re-election continues, and with it, messaging portraying cities like Seattle and Portland as lawless. In a minute, UW historian Margaret O'Mara will tell us why this strategy is effective for some voters. But first, let's get you caught up. Coronavirus transmission in Washington remains relatively low, and the state is doing well, but we could be doing better. UW researchers say if 95% of the population wore masks, we could save 600 lives. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation says right now, about 52% of Washingtonians regularly mask up. The message comes as experts worry about increased coronavirus transmission during the fall and winter when the virus can thrive. The COVID outbreak around UW's Greek community continues to grow. As of Sunday, 158 students have tested positive from a dozen fraternities and sororities. The outbreak has been ongoing since last month. Classes at UW started last week. And the Seattle Storm are within striking distance of winning a fourth championship title. Brianna Stewart scored 22 points as the team beat the Las Vegas Aces 104-91 on Sunday. Game 3 is tomorrow night. If you watched the presidential debate last week, you might have noticed something.
You know what? If they called us in Portland, we would put out that fire in a half an hour, but they won't do it because they're run by radical left Democrats. If you look at Chicago, if you look at any place you want to look, Seattle, they heard we were coming in the following day and they put up their hands and we got back Seattle.
Yep. The president is still talking about us. The caricature of Seattle as a violence-ridden anarchist jurisdiction is a big talking point for Trump. UW historian Margaret O'Mara is here to help us understand what's going on and why this tactic works so well. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Trish. Great to be here.
If all I knew about Seattle was what I heard from President Trump, I would think that this city is out of control, chaotic, lawless, run by Antifa. What is the goal of Trump and other politicians talking about the city this way?
Well, look, a good rule of politics. Politics are won not only on making a case for a candidate's merits and saying this is why you should vote for me and why I'm great, but it's also convincing voters that the other person they're running against is awful. Or if it's not a person, a whole movement or political party or city or way of life. And the us versus them has long been a very compelling and successful tactic in politics. And certainly, particularly Donald Trump's reelection campaign, he was expecting to run on the economy. That's a tough thing to run on now. He now is personally dealing with the coronavirus, but even before he was sort of the burden of that on his shoulders. And so his campaign has been a really aggressive, paint the other side as a danger. And Seattle has been part of that story. If you aren't watching Fox News, you may not realize that this has been running pretty nonstop since June.
And I want to pull that apart a little bit because the chop was a real thing that happened here. It was just 6 blocks. It was mostly peaceful, but there were definitely visuals that the Trump administration ran with.
Think of this. A group, Antifa and others, radical lefts, they went into a major U.S. city, Seattle, and they took over a big percentage of that city.
They designated the entire city as an anarchist jurisdiction. These are powerful images that are making their way into people's lives. Talk about that power, because Facebook, all it takes is one image.
Yes, that's right. And so, and I think it's a good lesson for all of us that when you see an incendiary image, you need to think about, well, what's happening around it that's not being seen? And certainly the goals of the protests and the tactics of many of the protesters, including those occupying the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone or occupied ongoing protest were designed to be nonviolent and peaceful, although there were people involved who also felt and continue to feel that the only way that the system is going to be changed is through violent, often property-focused protest, kind of anti-capitalist protest. And there is evidence in American history that, and sometimes when the system's not going to change, it has to be changed through more violent tactics. That is something that is motivating, some of the people who are active today.
Well, and let's remember, WTO was 20 years ago, but the battle in Seattle still has a certain ring to it, Margaret. We are a protest city. And that also adds to the visual, the militarized image of the police standing up against protesters, interacting with protesters in violent ways. And the DOJ's, the Department of Justice's designation of Seattle as an anarchist jurisdiction, it seems fantastical, but it really does paint a picture of an out-of-control city that needs to be clamped down on.
Yeah, I imagine that a lot of people listening had the experience that I had this summer, when everything's starting to happen, that you get these calls or emails from concerned friends and family members saying, "Are you okay? What's happening? Is Seattle on fire?" Particularly if you were only getting your news from certain outlets, and you could easily think the whole place was on fire. But also, Seattle politics, even as it continues to be played as kind of the anarchist jurisdiction, it's much more complicated than that. There are a lot of different factions. The way that this is being framed now by the Trump administration, it's as if Jenny Durkin and the most liberal/socialist left-leaning members of the city council are all on the same side. And those of us who live here know they are not.
Definitely. It's much more complicated. Exactly. Why does this tactic that Trump is using work? What is it about our psychology in time and space right now that is making this so effective?
Well, every myth, effective myth, is built around a grain of truth, right? There have been participants who firmly believe that nonviolent protest isn't going to get you anywhere and that violence is part of it. And now we have another layer of, right-wing violent agitators coming in. We saw this quite vividly in Portland within the last month, who are contributing to this and kind of creating a very volatile atmosphere. But the bigger picture of everything else is not being transmitted. And I think it's catching on in this moment because, one, we have a very polarizing incumbent president whose campaign strategy and actually governing strategy has been intensely oppositional, which is something that American presidents of both parties have not done before or have not done in modern memory.
Yeah. You have devoted your entire career to studying the presidency, among other things. I'm curious about your head, about what's going on today. What's happening in Margaret O'Mara's head?
Oh my gosh, this is going to be a therapy session with the whole region. I try to remember and remind myself that, one of the reasons I entered this business is because I think history gives us lots of reasons for optimism. History can be a big downer, trust me. Like when you really have a very unvarnished look at the past, it is very uncomfortable because you do have to kind of leave those sort of rosy images behind. And also these caricatures, whether it's a caricature of Seattle as an anarchist zone or a caricature of George Washington, I cannot tell a lie. You need to move and think about these as human processes and human beings. And when you do that, you see a lot of ugly, but you also see a lot of beauty. You see a lot of instances in when protest and political action, including voting, made a huge, huge difference. And when leadership can change everything, either for good or for bad. We are not kind of destined to kind of drive in a certain direction. There is a lot of dynamism at work here. And, this is perilous and this is serious. And it does keep me up at night. But I look for the hope in history and I keep on latching onto that and thinking about where we go from there.
Well, it's certainly a stunning time in our history. I don't know how many times we can use the word unprecedented. So I really appreciate your perspective, Margaret O'Mara. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Seattle Now is produced by Clare McGrane, Sophie Reed, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.